There was a prince who had everything. A palace with 40 rooms, servants who anticipated his needs before he knew he had them, advisors who nodded at everything he said, women who wanted to marry him, not him specifically, but the title and the land and the specific future that came with being the one he chose. He was 28 years old, and he was the loneliest person in the kingdom. One morning he looked in the mirror and he did not like what he saw. Not his face. He had no particular problem with his face. He didn't like what was behind the face. The emptiness. The specific hollow quality of a person who had never once in their life been seen as just a person. So he left. He cut his hair with a kitchen knife. He put on rough clothes. He walked out of the palace in the middle of the night and he went to a village 3 days' ride from the capital, and he became, for the first time in his life, a nobody. And then he met Ada. She was a baker's daughter with calloused hands and the kind of honest warmth that you could not fake even if you tried. She gave him bread when he was hungry. She gave him her time when everyone else walked past him. She made him feel, for the first time in 28 years of living inside gold walls, like the world was worth being in. He fell in love with her, completely. The way you fall in love when you are not performing anything and neither is the other person. And then the palace found him. And then he had to make a choice. And the choice he made, the thing he did to protect her, broke something between them that no palace and no crown and no declaration of love could put back together the way it had been. This is the story of what happens when a prince finds real love, and then, through his own specific combination of good intentions and bad decisions, loses it in a way that takes years to understand and even longer to address. I am not going to tell you how it ends here. I will tell you that the ending is not what you expect, and that there is a moment in this story, a specific moment in a throne room. That is one of the most honest things a person says to a king that a king had ever had to hear. Stay right here. Like this video if you believe that love built on a lie, even a well-intentioned one, cannot hold the weight of the truth forever. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub every week, stories like this. Hit the bell. Comment now before you finish watching. Tell us, do you think Elias deserved what happened? Come back after and tell us if you still think the same. The Kingdom of Adara had been ruled by the Obuasi dynasty for 200 years. Not by force, by the specific combination of strong agriculture, managed trade, and the kind of political intelligence that produced successors who were, generation by generation, capable of the work the kingdom required. The Obuasi kings were not all brilliant and they were not all beloved, but they were consistent in ways that mattered. The grain stores were managed, the roads were maintained, the disputes were adjudicated, and the kingdom continued. King Emmanuel Obuasi III had been a good king. He was 72 when the story begins, and the goodness of his kingship had been a specific, practical goodness. Not the dramatic goodness of a king who made grand gestures, but the steady goodness of one who woke early and read the reports and made the decisions that needed to be made and held the machinery of governance in motion through the consistent application of attention. He had a queen, Adwoa, who had been his partner in every sense, politically, personally, in the specific daily work of managing a kingdom and a household and a family simultaneously. She had died when Prince Elias was 17. Not suddenly, a long illness, a slow process that the court physicians had monitored, and that the king had managed with the same steady attention he brought to everything else, which was the specific sadness of a man who dealt with grief by continuing to do the work. Elias had been present for his mother's illness. He had been 17, and he had watched his father manage the dying of the person he loved most in the world by continuing to sign documents and attend councils and receive ambassadors. He had not known, watching this, whether it was strength or whether it was the specific avoidance of someone who did not know how to be with grief in any form that was not institutional. He had not asked his father. He had not had the kind of relationship with his father that produced those conversations. King Emmanuel was a good king and a distant father, not cold, not unkind, but distant in the way of someone for whom the private self was a carefully maintained private territory. He was affectionate in the specific ways that the court allowed. A hand on the shoulder at official functions, praise delivered through third parties, the occasional direct conversation about the prince's studies or progress that was warm enough to communicate care and brief enough to communicate limits. Elias had grown up understanding that he was loved in a way that was primarily expressed through the preparation of his future. He had tutors in law, in trade, in military strategy, in the history of the kingdom and of the kingdoms around it. He had a schedule from the age of 10 that was organized around the specific knowledge requirements of a future king. He was educated excellently and comprehensively, and he was, by the time he was 28, one of the most prepared heirs in Adara's 200-year history. He was also completely alone, in a way that had nothing to do with being surrounded by people. The people around him were sorted into two categories, and both categories produced the same result. The first category, people who needed something from him, his status, his favor, his eventual power. They were kind to him in the specific way of people who were managing a long-term investment. Their kindness was real in a functional sense. They were genuinely pleasant and genuinely attentive and genuinely available, but underneath all of it was the permanent awareness of what he was and what proximity to him could produce. The second category, people who were afraid of him, not afraid of him personally, afraid of the position, of the power, of saying the wrong thing to someone who would one day have the authority to make their life significantly more difficult. These people were careful with him, careful in the way that meant they never fully said what they thought. He had a friend named Quaim who had grown up in the palace as the son of his father's steward. Quaim was the closest thing he had to someone who saw him rather than his title. They had played together as children. They had studied together as teenagers. They had grown into adults together with the specific bond of people who shared a childhood in an unusual environment. But even Quaim, Elias recognized this, somewhere around 25. Even Quaim was aware of the position. There were things Quaim didn't say. There were disagreements Quaim softened. There was a layer of management in how Quaim talked to him that was not dishonest but was not entirely free either. The women were the worst. Not worst in a dramatic sense. They were pleasant. They were attentive. They were beautiful and accomplished, and some of them were genuinely intelligent and interesting women. But they all, without exception, approached him with a version of themselves that was designed rather than natural. They presented the version of themselves that seemed most appropriate for the position of future queen. They agreed with him carefully. They laughed at the right moments. They were performing, and the performance was good, and it was still a performance. He had been engaged twice. The first engagement had been to Princess Miriam of a neighboring kingdom, a political alliance arranged when they were both young, that had ended when the political calculation changed and the alliance was no longer necessary. He had been 22. He had met Miriam 4 times. He had felt nothing. The second had been his own choice. Her name was Amma, and she had been a noblewoman in his father's court, and she had been, of all the women he had met, the one who seemed most genuine. He had thought for 3 months that she was the one who actually saw him. Then he had overheard her talking to her lady-in-waiting. She had said, "The position is worth the compromise of the man." He had stood outside the door and heard her say this. He had not confronted her. He had ended the engagement 3 days later through the official channels, and he had not explained why, and he had accepted the political cost of the ended engagement without explanation, because the explanation required him to say out loud what he had heard, and he was not going to say it out loud. He was 26. For 2 years after that he was present in all the required ways and absent in the way that mattered, and his father noticed, and said nothing, and the court managed around it, and the preparation for kingship continued. The night of his decision was a Tuesday in October. He was standing at the window of his rooms listening to rain hit the marble of the courtyard below. He had been at a state dinner for 5 hours. He had listened to 30 people say things to him that they did not entirely mean. He had smiled at the right moments and asked the right questions, and produced the required performance of being the crown prince, and he had come back to his rooms and stood at the window and thought, I cannot do this for the rest of my life. Not the kingship. He was not running from the responsibility. He wanted to be king, genuinely, in the specific way of someone who understood the work and believed he could do it well. He was running from the isolation of being the prince inside the kingship. He thought, I want to know what I am when I have nothing to offer anyone. I want to know if there is a version of me that someone would choose without the palace. He called Quaim. Quaim came to his rooms at midnight. Elias explained the plan. Quaim's face did several things. He said, You want to leave the palace and live as a commoner. For a season, Elias said. Not forever, for long enough to understand what it's like. And the king, Quaim said. My father is not well, Elias said. He doesn't need to know. I will tell him I am touring the agricultural regions. Quaim said, This is extremely dangerous. I know, Elias said. If anyone recognizes you. I am going far enough that nobody will know my face, Elias said. 3 days from the capital, I need you to cover for me here. Quaim looked at him for a long time. You are doing this because of Amma, he said. I am doing this because of every person I have ever met who wanted something from me before they knew who I was, Elias said. I need to know if there is anything of me that is worth wanting on its own. Quaim was quiet. Yes, he said. Elias went to the kitchen and cut his hair. He went to the servants' quarters and found rough clothes. He looked in the mirror at a man who had no title and no palace and no gold. He did not feel afraid. He felt, for the first time in years, like he might be about to find out something real. He left before dawn. Stay with us, because the village is 3 days away and Ada is working at her bread stall. The village was called Obuasi. It was not picturesque in the way of villages that appeared in tales. It was not nestled between mountains or beside a glittering river. It was a working village on the flat agricultural plain south of the capital, 3 days' ride but a world apart in character. It had a market that was loud 3 days a week and quiet on the other 4. It had a well at the center. It had a rhythm that was determined entirely by the seasons and the crops and the specific human needs of 600 people who were managing their lives with what the land and their labor produced. Elias had given himself a name before he arrived, Eli, short, plain, a name that belonged to the kind of man he was pretending to be. He arrived on a Thursday morning. He arrived with nothing, a decision he had made deliberately. He had money in his boots, emergency funds, enough to get him back to the capital if something went wrong, but nothing accessible, nothing that would undermine the specific poverty he was performing. The market was the obvious starting point. He had thought about this during the 3 days of travel. He needed a reason to be in the village and he needed income. He had settled on wood. There was a small forest on the road to Obuasi, and he had gathered fallen timber on the last day of his journey, enough for a small bundle to sell. The market did not receive him well. This was the first lesson. He had lived his entire life in an environment where his presence was acknowledged, where his arrival in a room produced a specific response. He had never been invisible. He had been treated with deference or with careful performance or with the managed attentiveness of people who were aware of him, but he had always been aware that he was registered. The Obuasi market did not register him. People walked past him the way they walked past the other stalls, selectively, with purpose. Nobody was hostile. Nobody was warm. He was simply there with his bundle of wood, and the market organized itself around its existing patterns without adjusting for his arrival. He called out, the way he had heard street vendors call out. He felt the strangeness of it. His voice, used to addressing courts and councils, saying, "Wood for sale, good dry wood," calling into a crowd that moved past without slowing. A merchant, one of the wealthier-looking traders at the market, a large man with an expensive wrapper, came past, and his shoulder knocked Eli's wood bundle and it shifted and 2 pieces fell. The merchant said, "Move that from the path." Eli said, "I'm sorry, I'm just—" "Move it," the merchant said. He walked on. Eli picked up the 2 pieces of wood from the ground. He stood for a moment. He had been in the kingdom's most powerful rooms. He had been treated with the respect that power required people to produce. He had understood abstractly that the world was very different for people without power. He had not felt it until this moment, the specific feeling of being moved past, of being an obstacle rather than a presence, of having no weight in a social exchange. He stood with his pieces of wood, and he felt something arrive that was specific and unfamiliar. Humility, not the performed humility of someone going through the motions of modesty, the real kind, the kind that came from being genuinely insignificant in a situation. He rearranged his wood bundle and kept calling. He was 2 hours into this when Ada appeared. He had been noticing the bread stall from the beginning, partly because he was hungry, partly because the smell was the specific smell of fresh bread that was one of the genuinely good things about being alive. He had not approached it because he had no money accessible, and he was not going to perform poverty and then produce coins. He was sitting on the ground near his wood bundle. His feet hurt. He had walked from the forest that morning, when she came to the edge of her stall and looked at him. "You look like you haven't eaten in days," she said. He looked up. She was not what he had expected, which was a thought he found slightly ridiculous because he had not been expecting anything. She was young, mid-20s. Her hands, resting on the edge of the stall, had the specific look of hands that had worked every day for years. Her face had the quality of someone who was accustomed to being tired and who had not let the tiredness become her primary expression. Her eyes were direct, not bold in a performed way, direct in the way of someone who was used to looking at things clearly and was simply applying this to the situation in front of her. She held out a piece of bread. It was small and slightly burnt on one side, the last piece on the stall. "I have no money," he said. "Who said anything about money?" she said. "Hunger is a debt nobody should have to pay." He looked at the bread. He looked at her. He took it. "I'm Ada," she said. "Eli," he said. "Are you new to Obuasi?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Where from?" she said. "North," he said. "I'm looking for work." She looked at him with the specific assessment of someone who had met many people in this market who needed something. "My father needs help at the bakery," she said. "He hurt his back. It's not paid work, just food and a dry place to sleep." He looked at her. He had 3 days of planning and a clear set of parameters for his stay in the village. None of them had included being given work by the first person who was kind to him. "Yes," he said. Mensa Agie, Ada's father, was a compact man in his 50s with the specific kind of back pain that came from 30 years of bending over an oven and lifting heavy loads of flour. He had been running the bakery for those 30 years, since his own father had handed it to him, and he ran it with the particular combination of exactness and warmth that Ada had inherited from him. He received Eli with the direct assessment of someone who had no space for extra people and no particular reason to welcome one. He said, "Ada says you need work." "I do," Eli said. "Can you carry sacks of grain?" he said. "Yes," Eli said. "Can you wake at 4 in the morning?" he said. "Yes," Eli said. "Do you steal?" he said. Eli looked at him. "No," he said. Mensa looked at him for a long moment. "You speak like an educated man," he said. "I had a teacher when I was young," Eli said. "He was very particular about how I spoke." Mensah looked at him for another moment. Then he said, "The grain is in the back. There are 50 sacks and they need to be moved to the upper shelf before tomorrow morning. Start there." He went and started there. The 50 sacks of grain were the most physically demanding thing he had done in his life. Not because he was weak. He was not weak. He had physical training as part of his royal education. Because these sacks were a specific, awkward weight, and the back of the bakery was a low-ceilinged room, and 50 was genuinely 50. He moved them. At midnight he was on the last 10 sacks. Ada brought him water. She sat on the lower shelf and watched him work. "Most people stop at 30, she said. He looked at her. "Why?" he said. "Because at 30 it feels like enough," she said, "and the mind starts negotiating. At 30 you've done more than half. The mind says that's enough." "Did you expect me to stop at 30? He said. "I didn't know what to expect," she said. He moved the next sack. She said, "Where did you sleep last night?" "On the road," he said. "Before that," she said. He thought about what to say. "Somewhere else," he said. She looked at him with the direct eyes. "That is not an answer," she said. "No," he said, "it isn't." She was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to tell me," she said. "Everyone in this village has a story they don't tell. The bakery doesn't need your story, just your arms." He smiled. He had not smiled at anyone in a very long time, in a way that was not managed. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" she said. "The bread," he said, "and for not requiring an answer." She looked at him with the expression of someone who was filing information. She stood. "There is a sleeping mat in the storeroom," she said. "It's not much." "It's enough," he said. She left. He moved the last 10 sacks. He lay on the mat in the storeroom at 1 in the morning. He thought, "This is the first night in years that I have gone to sleep having genuinely earned the right to sleep." He fell asleep immediately. The months that followed are the months this story is actually about. Stay here. He stayed. He had planned 3 months. The 3 months became 5 and then 7 and then 10, and he stopped counting the months because the counting felt like a countdown to something he did not want to arrive. The bakery work was daily and physical, and it had the specific reward of work that produced something visible. Every morning there was flour. Every morning there was fire in the oven. Every morning there was the specific transformation of raw ingredients into bread, which was the thing that fed the village. It was not complex work. It was essential work. He understood in those mornings the difference between those two categories in a way that nothing in his palace education had communicated. Mensah was not an easy man to work for. He was precise and he was demanding, and he communicated praise infrequently and criticism directly. He told Eli on the 4th day that he was shaping the bread loaves incorrectly and demonstrated the correct method without softening the correction. He told him on the 9th day that he had let the fire drop too low and it had affected the day's bread, and that this would not happen again. Eli received this. Not because he had no choice, because it was correct. He had shaped the loaves incorrectly. He had let the fire drop. He adjusted. The bread improved. He had never in his life received criticism that was not softened before delivery and managed afterward. He had never known, therefore, whether the criticism was real or performed. Mensah's criticism was real. It was about the bread and only about the bread, and when the bread was right, Mensah said nothing because nothing needed to be said. Ada ran the front of the stall. She was at the front every market day with the loaves her father had made, and she sold them with the specific efficiency of someone who knew every regular customer and who understood what each of them needed before they said it. She gave credit to families who had had a bad week without making a performance of it. She kept the accounts in a small book that she updated every evening with the specific precision her father had taught her. She also talked to Eli. In the evenings, after the stall was closed and the bakery was cleaned and Mensa had gone to bed with his back pain and his pipe, Ada and Eli sat outside on the low wall and they talked. These conversations were the most honest conversations Eli had ever had. Not because they covered significant material. They talked about ordinary things, about the village, about who was having trouble with their harvest, about the merchant who cheated on weights, about the upcoming festival that the village held every year before the dry season. They talked about bread, about the specific varieties Mensa made and the ones Ada wanted to try. They talked about the stories Ada's grandmother had told her, which were the specific stories of the region that he had never heard because the palace's education had focused on a different kind of history. He talked about things he invented, a past that was consistent and modest and plausible, a father who had been a teacher in a northern town, a mother who had died young. He had thought about this carefully and had constructed it with enough detail that it held together. But the conversations were real even inside the false history. The way Ada asked questions, not as interrogation but as genuine curiosity, the kind that assumed the person she was talking to was interesting before they demonstrated it, made him say things he had not planned to say and mean things he had not planned to mean. One evening she said, "What do you want? Not what you're doing now. What do you want your life to look like?" He was quiet for a long time. He said, "I want to wake up in the morning in a place that is mine, not given to me, mine. And I want the person I wake up next to have chosen me because they wanted to." She looked at him. "Not because they had to," he said. "Do you think people choose the people they love?" she said. "Don't they?" he said. "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes it just happens to you, like weather. You don't choose rain, it just falls." He looked at her. "Was that what happened to you?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I had a man," she said. "Before, 2 years ago. He was from the merchant family at the northern end of the village. He was very sure of himself. He said things that sounded like promises and he meant them for about a month and then he meant other things. When I understood this, I ended it." "How did you understand it?" he said. "He stopped listening," she said. "One day I was talking and I realized he was not listening and that he had probably not been listening for several weeks. And I thought, this is how it ends, not with a fight, with silence." He thought about the conversations he had had in the palace, about how many of them had been people talking at him while performing listening. "I am listening," he said. She looked at him. "I know," she said. "That is why I keep talking." The love was slow. Not gradual in the way of things that built incrementally. Slow in the way of something that was already present from very early, and that both of them moved toward carefully, with the specific care of people who had both been hurt by the careless version of this thing. The first time he touched her hand intentionally was in the 5th month. They were at the well and a bucket had slipped and he caught it and her hand was there, and he held both the bucket and her hand, and he looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything. She did not pull her hand away. He let go of the bucket. He held her hand. They stood at the well. After a moment she said, "Eli." "Yes," he said. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Tell me," he said. "I have been trying not to feel this," she said. "Because you came here with nothing and you are still here, and I don't know what that means for the future, and I am a baker's daughter, and I am practical, and I do not fall in love with men who have no future." "But," he said. "But I think I have fallen in love with you anyway," she said. "And I need you to know that before it goes further, because if you are going to leave, I need you to tell me now so I can prepare." He looked at her. He thought, tell her who you are, tell her now. He thought, if I tell her now, everything changes. The way she looks at me will change. The conversations will change. She will never know what she would have felt if I had been nobody. He thought, that is a selfish calculation. He thought it, and he could not move past it. He said, "I am not going to leave." She looked at him. "Is that a promise?" she said. "Yes," he said. He meant it. He meant it completely in the specific way of a man who had forgotten, in 10 months of real living, that there was a palace waiting. He was going to tell her the truth. He had decided this. He was going to do it properly. He was going to find the right moment, and he was going to sit down with her and tell her everything. He was still finding the right moment when the guards arrived. Stay right here, because the next part changes everything. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub right now, because what the guards do next is the part that started the worst year of Ada's life. Hit that bell. The guards came on a Wednesday night in the 8th month. They came in the dark, which was deliberate. 4 of them, in civilian clothing, not the palace livery, but the kind of clothing that people who rode hard for 3 days wore. They had been sent by the king's council, not by the king. The king was too ill to send anyone anywhere. The council had been managing the deteriorating situation of a king whose illness had become public enough that questions about succession were no longer theoretical. Prince Elias had been gone for 8 months. The cover story Quaim had maintained, a tour of the agricultural regions, periodic dispatches, had held for 6 months. In the 7th month, one of the council members had made an inquiry that Quaim could not deflect. In the 8th month, one of the guards had been dispatched specifically to find the prince, with instructions that came from the council's security apparatus rather than from Quaim or from the king. The guard who found Eli was named Captain Adara. He was a professional. He had served the palace for 20 years. He found Eli at the bakery at 10 in the evening when Eli was closing up, and he came to him in the dark and he said, quietly and directly, "Prince Elias, I am here on behalf of the king's council." Eli looked at him. He had known this was coming. He had not known when. He had been living in the specific denial of someone who had found something real and was protecting the finding by not looking at what was on the other side of the horizon. "The king is dying," Captain Adara said. "He has perhaps 2 months. The council requires your return to the capital immediately. The succession must be formalized while the king can still participate." Eli said, "I need time." "There is no time," Captain Adara said. His voice was not cruel. It was the voice of someone delivering a message that had a deadline built into it. "I need to tell someone," Eli began. "Prince Elias," Captain Adara said.
I did not see him.
He paused. "We have
He was
located
not
the
there.
bakery. We know the baker's daughter. If you do not return with us tonight, the council's instruction is to compel your return by whatever means are necessary. I am not going to threaten a woman who has nothing to do with this. But I am also not going to leave this village without you." Eli was very still. He understood the sentence. The sentence meant, if you make this difficult, the village becomes a way of applying pressure, not the full threat of the original story's guards not burning, but pressure. And in this specific situation, pressure on Ada and her father was not something he was going to allow. He said, "Give me 1 hour." Captain Adara said, 1 hour. He went to Ada. He found her at the well. She was washing the stall cloths from the day's market, a late task, the kind that she did in the evenings when everything else was done. He stood at the edge of the light. He had spent the walk from the bakery to the well planning what to say. He had considered many versions of the truth. He had considered a version that prepared her, that said, "There is something about me that I haven't told you, and I need to go now, but I will explain later." He had dismissed this because later did not have a timeline, and because the situation was what it was, and because he was afraid. He was afraid that if he told her now, in this moment, with the guards waiting and the urgency of the night pressing on everything, the truth would arrive as chaos, and she would have no space to receive it properly. He was also afraid of something else, something he could not fully name, something about what her face would do when she found out he had been lying to her for 8 months, Something about the specific quality of the look he had been receiving from her, the look that saw him as just a man, and how that look would change. He had a plan, and the plan was cowardice dressed as protection, and he knew it was both, and he executed it anyway. He said, "Ada." She turned. She saw his face. She said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I'm leaving." She put the cloth down. She said, "Eli." "I have found work," he said. "In the capital, better work, real work. I cannot stay here." She was very still. She said, "What are you talking about? You have work here, you have." "This isn't enough," he said. "I need more than this." The words were coming out, and they were the wrong words, and he knew they were the wrong words, and he was saying them anyway because the alternative, the right words, required something he did not have in this moment, which was the courage to see her face when she understood the full truth. She said, "More than what? More than us." He said, "I was always going to leave. I delayed it." Her face. He saw her face do the thing he had been afraid of, but not the thing he had predicted. Not anger. Confusion first, and then beneath the confusion something quieter and worse. The specific expression of someone who is reaching back through everything they believed and checking whether it was real. She said, "You told me you would not leave." "That was," he started. "You promised me," she said. He said nothing. She said, "Look at me." He looked at her. She said, "Is this real, what you're doing right now?" He said, "Yes." He said it because he could not say no and mean it, and because he could not say no and have Captain Adara wait long enough for the conversation that the real answer required. She looked at him for a long time. She said, "You are doing this because you found something better." "Yes," he said. She looked at the cloth in the water. She said, "I need you to go now. If you are going, go now, don't stand here." He said her name. She said, "Please go." He walked away. He did not look back. He walked to where Captain Adara was waiting, and he got on the horse they had brought for him, and he rode through the dark away from Obuasi. He did not know that Ada stood at the well for a very long time after he left. He did not know that her father heard her crying and came to the back of the house and found her there, and held her without asking questions, because some kinds of crying did not need questions. He did not know any of this, because he was 3 days' ride away before the morning came. He returned to the palace. His father was worse than he had been prepared for, worse than the dispatches had communicated, worse than the council's language had suggested. The illness had progressed in the specific rapid way of illnesses that had been stable and then tipped. The king was in his bed and he was conscious, and he was the version of his father that Elias had always known except diminished, which was more disorienting than a completely unfamiliar thing would have been. He went to his father. The king looked at him. He said, "You cut your hair." Elias said, "Yes." "It will grow back," the king said. This was the extent of the conversation about where Elias had been. The council was less restrained. There were meetings, long, formal, sometimes heated meetings about the succession formalization, about the timeline, about the specific governance arrangements that would need to be in place before and after the transition. Elias attended all of them. He was prepared for them. The education had been thorough, and the 8 months had not erased it. He had thought he would feel something returning to the palace. He had expected either relief or grief, relief at the comfort or grief at the loss. He felt neither. He felt the specific flatness of someone who was doing what was required, and was not currently in a situation where feeling was useful. He functioned. He managed the transition with the specific competence that his preparation had built. His father died 3 months after his return. The funeral was the formal occasion that a king's death required, the ceremony and the mourning and the specific machinery of state that expressed a kingdom's grief. He became king. He was sitting on the throne for the first time in the formal sense. The coronation done, the crown placed, the court assembled, and he thought about Ada. He had been thinking about Ada for 3 months. He had been thinking specifically about the moment at the well and the specific words he had used and the specific expression on her face and the fact that he had walked away from her with a lie and had not been back. He had not been back because he had been managing a dying father and a kingdom transition, and there had been genuinely no space for anything personal. He had also, he recognized, been not going back because going back meant looking at what he had done, and he was not yet ready to look at it clearly. After the coronation, he went to Quaim. He told Quaim about Ada. Quaim listened. He said, "You told her you found something better." "Yes," Elias said. "And you left," Quaim said. "Yes," Elias said. Quaim was quiet for a moment. He said, "And now you are king and you are going to go back and tell her the truth and offer her the crown." "Yes," Elias said. Quaim looked at him. "What do you think is going to happen?" Quaim said. "I think she will understand," Elias said. "When she knows the full story that I had to leave, that it was to protect her, that the lie was too." "Elias," Quaim said. He used the name deliberately, without the title. "What did she say to you at the well before you left?" Elias said, "She said please go." "And before that?" Quaim said. Elias said, "She said you promised me." Quaim was quiet. "She is going to need more than an explanation," Quaim said. "I know," Elias said. "Does she know you love her?" Quaim said. "I never told her," Elias said. Quaim looked at him for a long moment. "You should have thought about this before you chose the lie," he said. "I know," Elias said. "I'm not telling you not to go," Quaim said. "I'm telling you to go with your eyes open about what you might find. The throne room is coming, and Ada's answer is the part that nobody saw coming. Stay here." They found her and brought her to the palace. He had instructed the council that this was a personal matter and that the approach to the village needed to be conducted with care. He had written a letter, not for Ada, for Minsa, for her father, explaining who he was and what he was asking. The letter had been delivered by a single court messenger, not a guard contingent. He did not know what Minsa had said when he read the letter. He did not know what Ada had said. He received a message back from Minsa that was 3 lines long and that said, "She will come. She is coming because she wants answers, not because she wants a throne." He read those 3 lines many times in the days before she arrived. He arranged the throne room. He had been thinking about how to do this, whether to have the full court present or to clear the room. He had initially thought, the full court, it would be a public declaration of his intention. He had reconsidered. He did not want her first experience of the palace to be 100 courtiers watching her have the most significant conversation of her life. He had cleared the room. When she was brought in, there was nobody else. She came through the large doors. He had not seen her in a year. She was thinner, not dramatically, but the specific thinness of someone who had had a hard year. She was wearing her market clothes, the good ones, the ones she wore on formal market days, which were decent and clean, and were exactly the right thing for someone who was Ada and who was not going to pretend to be something else for a palace. She walked through the room, and she walked with the specific directness she always had. She looked at the throne. She looked at him. He saw her look do the thing he had been afraid of, the reorganization of the information. Eli becoming Elias, the bakery becoming the palace, the months of conversation becoming the specific, full understanding of what they had been talking to. He stood. He came down the steps from the throne. He said, "Ada." She looked at him. He said, I know all of it. I need you to let me explain." She said, "Explain." He told her. He told her everything, the palace, the engagements, the isolation, the decision to leave. He told her about Quame. He told her about the guards finding him. He told her about Captain Ade's message and the threat, not the burning, but the pressure, the implication that the village could become leverage. He told her about the lie. He said, I told you I was leaving for something better because I didn't know how to tell you the truth in that moment, and I was afraid of what your face would do when you understood what I had done. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she was quiet. He said, I want you here, not because you are a convenient choice for queen, because you are the only person who has ever spoken to me as if my title was not the first thing about me. Because the months in Obuasi were the only months of my life where I felt like a person rather than a position. Because you gave me bread when I was hungry and didn't ask for anything in return, and I have never forgotten that, and I will never forget it. He paused. He said, you can be my queen. Everything I have is yours. I know this sounds like I am offering you a transaction, and I am not trying to. I am trying to say that my whole life was the palace, and then it was Obuasi, and the palace never felt like a life, but Obuasi did. And you were the reason. The throne room was very quiet. Ada looked at him for a long time. She said, you think this is a happy ending? He said, I hope it can be. She said, Elias, I need you to hear me. She said it with the direct voice, the voice from the well. She said, I spent a year believing that the man I loved was a coward who left me because poverty was beneath him. I spent a year with that in my chest. Not your reason, because you didn't give me your reason. You gave me the lie, and I woke up with the lie every morning for a year. He said, I know. I'm not finished, she said. He stopped. The lie was not the protection you thought it was, she said. The lie was the worst version of what happened. The truth would have hurt. It would have hurt a great deal, knowing that you were a prince, knowing that the whole thing was a test, knowing that the person I thought I was falling in love with was not exactly who I thought he was. That would have been painful. She looked at him. But the lie said something specific about what you thought of me, she said. It said, I don't trust you with the real thing. It said, I will protect her from the guards and from the danger, but I will not protect her from not knowing. I will let her think I left because she wasn't worth staying for. His face did something. She saw it. She said, you didn't think about that when you were choosing the lie. No, he said. You thought about the danger, she said. You thought about the guards and what they might do. You thought about protecting my body, but you did not think about what the lie would do to the part of me that trusted you. He was very still. She said, I didn't love a king. I loved Eli, and Eli was the man who carried the grain sacks to the end, who listened when I spoke, who sat at the well and asked what I wanted. And Eli made me a promise and then broke it with a lie because in the moment when the choice was difficult, he chose the path that protected him from having to watch my face. He said, I was afraid. She said, I know. She said it without contempt, with the specific clarity of someone who had understood something fully. She said, you came to Obuasi because you wanted to know if someone would love you for yourself, and someone did. I loved Eli completely, not for the crown, not for anything you could give me, for the way you listened, for the way you carried the grain, for the way you sat at that well and didn't let go of my hand. She looked at him. But Eli, she said, was brave enough to stay up all night with 50 sacks of grain. He was not brave enough to tell me the truth when it cost him something. And that is the man I need to think about. He said, I can be that man. She looked at him. Can you? She said. He said, I don't know yet. I want to be. I have been thinking about it for a year, about what I did at the well and why I did it, about what you said that you needed to know before it went further so you could prepare. You asked for honesty and I gave you a performance. She looked at him. He said, I am not asking you to come back to what we were. I know that is gone. I am asking you to let me earn something different, Something where you know who I am and I know who I am and we start from a real place." She was quiet for a very long time. She looked at the throne behind him. She looked at him. She said, "I am going home to Obuasi." He looked at her. She said, "Not because of what you did. Not because not because of that." He understood what she stopped herself from saying. She said, "Because I need time. Because a year of believing a lie and a day of understanding the truth are not the same thing. And because I am Ada Agyei and I am a baker's daughter and I have been in a palace for 2 hours, and I do not know what I think about being in a palace." He said, "How much time?" She said, "I don't know." He said, "Should I come to Obuasi?" She looked at him. She said, "Not as a king, not with guards and a crown and a purpose. If you come to Obuasi, come the way you came the first time, as Eli." He said, "Eli was a lie." She said, "Eli was also the truest version of you that I have ever seen. The lie was the name and the history. The rest was real." She turned. She walked to the door. He said, "Ada." She stopped. He said, "You once told me that love was like weather, that it fell on you whether you chose it or not." She waited. He said, "It fell on me." She was quiet. She said, "It fell on me too." She went through the door. He went to Obuasi. He went 6 months later. He told Quame where he was going, and he told the council he was traveling, and he asked for no guards and no announcement, and he went on his own. He arrived in Obuasi on a Thursday morning. He had no crown and no livery. He had a rough shirt. He went to the bakery. Mensa was at the oven. He looked up. He looked at Elias. He said, "You are back." "Yes," Elias said. Mensa looked at him for a long time. He said, "Do you remember what I told you about the bread?" Elias said, "You said I was shaping the loaves incorrectly." "I said the mistakes you make when you rush the shaping cannot be fixed after the bread is baked," Mensa said. "You can cover them, you can present them well, but the bread knows." Elias looked at him. "You made a mistake in the shaping," Mensa said. "Yes," Elias said. "Can you fix it?" Mensa said. "I don't know," Elias said. "I want to try." Mensa looked at him. He said, "Ada is at the well." He was at the well. She was there. She turned when she heard him. She looked at him. He said, "I brought no crown." She said, "I see that." He said, "I brought no promises either. I have a history of making them at the wrong moment." She almost smiled. He said, "I came because I want to start from the real place, whatever that looks like." She looked at him. He said, "I know I am a king. I cannot change that. I know you are Ada Agyei and you are a baker's daughter and you have calloused hands and you give bread to people who have nothing and you don't ask them what they will give in return. I cannot change that either. I don't want to change it." She was quiet. He said, "I am asking not for a throne room answer, just, can we try?" She looked at the well. She looked at him. She said, "You know my father will have questions." He said, "I know." She said, "He will have many questions." "I know," he said. "I will answer all of them." She said, "He may not like the answers." "I know," he said. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Eli." He looked at her. She said, "Your name is Elias." "Yes," he said. She said, "I need to say the real name, not the other one." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. She said, "Elias, I'm still angry." "I know," he said. "I am going to be angry for a while," she said. "Yes," he said. "And if you cannot receive that," she said, "then this will not work." "I can receive it," he said. She looked at him with the direct eyes. She said, "The grain sacks." He said, "Yes." She said, "There are 50 new sacks in the back." He looked at her. He said, "I'll start there." She watched him go into the bakery. She turned back to the well. She stood there for a moment. She thought about the bread that her father had said could not be fixed after it was baked. She thought that is true of bread. She thought it is not always true of people. She picked up the bucket. She drew the water. She went inside. The wedding was a year later. It was not in the palace. It was in Obuasi, in the village square, with the 600 people of the village attending, and with Mensa Agier giving his daughter away in the specific manner of a man who had watched the whole situation carefully for 2 years, and had arrived at the conclusion that this was acceptable. Not enthusiastically acceptable, acceptable. He had told the king privately, in a conversation that was the most direct conversation anyone had had with Elias since Ada herself. "If you lie to her again, about anything, I will tell everyone in this village about the sacks." Elias had said, "I understand." Mensa had said, "She cried for a very long time." Elias had said, "I know." Mensa had said, "Make sure she never cries for you like that again." Elias had said, "I will spend my life making sure of it." Mensa had looked at him. He had said, "Good enough." Ada's dress was not the dress that court seamstresses would have designed for a queen. It was the dress she had chosen herself from a fabric seller in the market, a rich fabric in a deep amber color that her grandmother had always said was the color of good things coming. She looked like herself in it. This was what Elias thought when she came toward him. Not like a queen, like Ada, like the woman who had given him burnt bread when he was hungry and had not asked what he would give in return, like the woman at the well who had asked what he wanted from his life, like the woman who had said, "I have fallen in love with you and I need you to know that before it goes further." He took her hands. She looked at him. She said quietly, just for him, "You look like you haven't eaten in days." He said, "I've been nervous." She said, "There's bread in the bakery." He said, "Is it burnt?" She said, "A little." He said, "My favorite kind." She looked at him. She almost laughed. She laughed. It was the first time in 2 years that he had made her laugh. The village celebrated. There is a moment in this story that is easy to miss. It is not the throne room confrontation, though that is the most dramatic moment. It is not the wedding, though that is the most hopeful. It is Ada at the well on the night Elias left, watching him walk away. She had asked him to look at her. She had said, "Look at me." And he had looked, and he had said yes, and he had walked away anyway. This is the part that Ada was really talking about when she stood in the throne room a year later and said the things she said. Not the lie about having better work elsewhere. Not even the lie about who he was. The specific lie that happened when she asked him to look at her, and he looked and still walked away. She had given him everything she had. She had given him bread when he was hungry. She had given him her time and her honesty and the specific private history of who she was. She had given him her hand at the well. She had given him a promise to stay, and she had given him the truth about what she felt before she had to, because she believed that love required that kind of honesty. And in the moment when he had the choice, tell her the truth or tell her a lie, he had chosen the version that protected his eyes. Not her heart, his eyes. He could not bear to watch her face understand what he had done. So he removed himself from the watching. This is not unusual. This is, in fact, the most human part of the story. Most of the ways we hurt the people we love are not dramatic. They are exactly this, the choice, in a difficult moment, to protect ourselves from watching what the truth does to someone we care about. We call it protecting them. It is usually protecting ourselves. Ada understood this. She understood it clearly and without cruelty. She did not want to punish Elias. She did not want to make him suffer. She wanted him to understand what he had actually done, as opposed to what he thought he had done. He thought he had protected her. He had taken away her right to know. There is a difference. The ending of this story is not a complete restoration. It does not undo the year that Ada spent believing a lie. It does not give back the specific quality of what they had in Obuasi. That thing was, as she said, gone. What it builds is something different, something that starts from a real place. A king who went back to the village without his crown. A woman who let him carry the grain sacks before she decided anything. A conversation at a well that was honest in a way the first one had not been. They built something real, out of what was broken. And the bread was still a little burnt. That is the story. If you are in the middle of a choice right now, the choice between the version of the truth that protects you from watching someone's face and the version that is just honestly, plainly true, choose the honest one. It will cost you more in the moment. It will cost you much less in the year after. This has been Tribal Tales Hub. If this story stayed with you, if Ada's words in that throne room or Elia's at the well, or the burnt bread at the end, did something for you, like this video. One click is all it takes to tell us this is what you want more of. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub. We are here every week with a story that has something real in it. Hit that bell so you never miss one. Comment below. Did your answer change? At the beginning you told us whether Elias deserved what happened. Tell us now, do you still think the same? Or did the full story show you something different? Share this video with someone who needs to hear that love built on a lie, even a protective one, is still built on a lie. And that real love can survive the truth, but often cannot survive the version of you that couldn't tell it. This has been Tribal Tales Hub. We will see you in the next story.